Okay, John, it's 7 o'clock. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm sure some other
Okay.
folks will be joining us. I'm Dave Atkinson. Up until November of last year, I was the president of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. I retired and am now serving as a kind of the local project manager for this project that we're talking about tonight. In just a minute, I'll introduce our lead consultant on this project, and he'll explain where we are. This will be an update for kind of where the project is and where it might be going in the few months ahead. Just as a little background, several years ago, after the recession wreaked havoc on the economy, especially in Eastern Kentucky, and the coal market was down, the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, which is a business association and it's headquartered in Frankfort, pulled together a group of 20, I think it's now about 25, very prominent Eastern Kentucky born business people. I think there are two of us in there who are not natives of Eastern Kentucky, so the vast majority in the room are. I'm just a facilitator of the group, and we have an attorney who is helping us who is from Lexington. But those people, after a couple of meetings of talking about what could we do to help Eastern Kentucky, focused pretty quickly on tourism as an untapped resource. Eastern Kentucky is just an incredibly beautiful region, and it has a road network that makes many of the places in Eastern Kentucky accessible. Pretty quickly, also, the group focused on Red River Gorge for a couple of reasons. One is it's already a tourism draw. It has a very positive brand, in other words, a very positive reputation of people. Young people especially want to go to the Gorge. It's a popular place. And it's geographically a natural gateway to the remainder of Eastern Kentucky, especially if you're coming from the three largest metropolitan areas close to Eastern Kentucky, and that is Lexington, Louisville, Cincinnati. Of course, Huntington, Ashland is up in the northeast corner of that. So we started focusing on that, and we passed the hat among ourselves, raised some money, just voluntary contributions, and conducted two studies. Those studies, we won't get into great depth tonight unless you have questions about them, but they're available. You can see the entire studies on our website, which is redriverky.com, redriverky.com. We're going to be talking about two websites tonight. One is the project website, which I just talked about. And then the other one is My Social Pinpoint, and John Bucher can describe that in just a minute. That's the one where we're gathering public input, and the one that many of you probably use to gain access to this call tonight. After the two studies, the group kind of went dormant for a while, but then there was kind of a new sense of energy, and we decided to get more serious, started looking at some land in the area of Red River Gorge, and decided to apply for a grant from the federal government. And we were successful in that. It took about a year and a half, but we got a $500,000 grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission to be matched by $500,000 from the state. And we were successful in getting that back in November. So that's $1 million. And with that, we put out an advertisement all over the country, all over the world, really. We had somebody in Singapore respond to it. We had about 26 firms that indicated an interest in doing a master plan for us. A master plan for a destination resort, but also a master plan for the four-county area around the Gorge and what tourism might mean in terms of economic growth for those four counties. So we obtained that grant, and with that, we chose, after interviewing several firms at length, we chose the Stantec firm. It's an international firm based in Western Canada. I think that's where the headquarters is, but they're very prominent in Kentucky and actually have about 300 employees in Kentucky. John Bucher, who I will introduce in just a minute, is out of the Louisville office, but we have people on the team who are on the call with us tonight from Florida, from Denver. A couple of their people are up in Vancouver, Western Canada. So that's the team, about 10 or 12. They hired a firm also in Louisville that's helping with communications and branding and that sort of thing. In January, we had a meeting in Stanton at the Emergency Operations Center, and that's where we officially hired Stantec to do the study. And we also, perhaps just as important, we appointed a local advisory board, a 15-member local advisory board made up of citizens, several of whom are on the call tonight. That board includes the 4 county judges from the 4 county area. It includes some well-known environmental advocates, rock climbers, local business people, cabin owners, great group of people. And they've been meeting monthly with the Stantec consultants, kind of looking over things, seeing how the progress is coming and all of that. Because of COVID, our project has been delayed somewhat. Probably, I would guess 4 to 6 weeks from the original timeline. The original timeline called for the study to be done by July 31st. I think now most of it will be done by the end of August, maybe a little bit into September. We lost time, not because the consultants couldn't do their research, their market research, their research into tourism trends, et cetera, but the community engagement piece of getting the local communities involved, you couldn't have meetings. And so we couldn't have the big community workshop that we had planned for the Powell County High School back around April, I think around spring break, around April 6th or 7th, I think. We just couldn't do it. So tonight's town hall meeting, a virtual town hall meeting, and the website that John will describe in a little bit is a way in which we can ask hundreds of people. We want hundreds of people to respond and give us their ideas about what they would like to see, what they don't want to see, that sort of thing in the Gorge area. And we'll try to get answers to a lot of those and try to communicate in a two-way deal for the next 2.5, 3 months to complete this process. I think that's about it. I noticed, John, you might offer a different perspective, but I think from what I've heard from you guys, from the consulting team, we're probably about 1/3 of the way through your process, but most of that time has been spent quietly on research and analysis, and we'll hear a little bit about that process tonight. So the process will pick up some pace now. I think it has some momentum. We'll start hearing more from the consultants, and perhaps we'll have additional meetings like this in the future. I would encourage you to participate in the survey, and John will describe that, but please go on there, give us your ideas, give us your opinions, and tell us what you think the future ought to be. Because growth is going to occur in the Gorge area. It's too popular. It's going to keep growing. The question is, how does it grow, and what is the community involvement in that growth to determine what's good for folks who have their livelihoods, their kids, and their grandkids in that region. So with that, I'll introduce John and ask him to introduce the other members of his team, tell kind of what they specialize in and where they're based, and then we'll go from there. We have a chat line. Some of you have already, I think, put some comments in there. Feel free to do that throughout the call. So John Bucher out of the Louisville office of Stantec, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And I really appreciate all of you joining and participating in this and in hopefully in future events that we have that we do virtually. Again, real quick, I wanted to just kind of give you an idea of who we are. As Dave mentioned, I'm in Stantec's Louisville office. I grew up in Kentucky down by Mammoth Cave National Park. I spent some time in the Gorge prior to this and then since this, so it's a place that was already of interest to me before this project came about. Also with me this evening on the call and can answer some questions are our team of landscape architects. Nancy Locke out of our Denver office, Kevin Mangan out of Naples, Florida, and Greg Meyer out of Orlando, Florida. And they all specialize in resort development. They're landscape architects by trade, so they are designers who've worked on resorts in many places, including mountain settings similar to what we're working on with Red River Gorge. We also have our colleagues from MXD. They are economic development strategists out of Vancouver, Canada, and they work all over the U.S. and around the world as well, and have bring lots of tourism experience to our team, as well as general economic development experience. And we have Creative Studio on our team as well. They are based out of Louisville. They are helping us with the tourism marketing and branding strategy that we're developing for the 4-county Red River Gorge region as part of this project. So they're all here to answer questions. If you guys ask questions that Dave and I can't answer, but we will definitely try to answer as many questions as we can this evening. So I'm going to start a presentation in just a minute. I'm going to share my screen, but one of the things I wanted to tell you is if you go to you scroll your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of buttons. There's one that says chat and one that says Q&A. If you click on the Q&A button, you'll get a box where you can enter a question, and then other people can like those questions and choose to help us choose which ones we need to answer. So if you all can use it that way, then we can have a better idea of which questions we really need to get to if we have too many questions to answer. So you'll see you can give it a thumbs up, and the more people give it a thumbs up, then the more we will know which ones we have to answer. So,
hey, John.
Yeah.
Several people have mentioned on the chat line that they don't see a drop-down list for participants. Is that just for presenters to see? I can see it. We have 64 people on the call right now.
Let's see. Did that help?
Maybe that's just not a feature that's offered.
I don't think it's necessarily offered, but I just changed one setting that may allow people to see who's there.
Okay.
That may help.
All right.
So.
Okay. And also, would you mention too that folks are muted?
Yeah. So everybody is muted, and your video is turned off. If we need folks to speak, I can turn you on manually on my end, but you can't do that on your end. That's the functionality of having a large webinar like this. So keep putting in questions and liking them, and then when we get to the Q&A portion, we'll start answering those. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen and show you our presentation. And Dave, you can tell me if I get it right. So
there it is.
okay. So real quick, our agenda, we're gonna give we've already started with the project update, so you kind of have an idea of where we are. I will give you a introduction to our social pinpoint website and how that works. We'll go through what we're calling our preliminary findings and opportunities report, so you can see what it is we've actually been doing over the past few months, the types of things we've been looking at. And then I'll give you a little bit of an overview of our project timeline, what are our next steps, and then we're going to spend hopefully a lot of time answering questions. So what have we been up to? So existing physical conditions review. So what we did is we have a team of folks from Stantec. We have all based pretty locally that did this work. Engineers, environmental scientists, geologists. And what we did is we went through just to get an idea of what are the existing physical conditions in that 4-county region that will impact the ability to develop a resort. So we looked at things like wastewater, the availability of sewers, the capacity of the sewage treatment plant. We looked at drinking water and where there where the counties are supplying drinking water, what the capacity is of the plants, and the location of the tanks and pressure and things like that. We looked at the transportation system, primarily the roadway networks, and what the conditions are. Where are there some projects that have already been identified that are in the state transportation plan, and things that projects or other deficiencies that might impact where we site a resort and how people access the resort. We also are looking at environmentally sensitive areas, endangered species, and critical habitat. We're doing a market analysis, and we have done, and I'll get into the details of the market analysis in a minute. We've been doing some stakeholder meetings. We've met with several of the tourism directors. We had a meeting with the Climbers Coalition. We've had a meeting with some folks from the Forest Service. We'll be having another. And so we've been setting those up just to get people's feedback, and we've done some site visits, and I'll go through our site selection process and what we've done in terms of selecting sites. So In terms of the public engagement, we spent a lot of time getting this website set up, and I'm going to share that screen so that you can see how that works, the functionality on that page. And Dave, are you seeing the Social Pinpoint webpage right now?
Yes.
Okay. So some of you probably...
I see your cursor also.
Okay. Some of you have probably seen this. This was our announcement for the virtual town hall. What we really want folks to do is come and visit these items on the webpage. And we will be updating these as the project goes on. As we move to different phases, we'll add different ones for you to participate in. So we have this map, which is show us your favorite places in the Gorge area. So it's the whole 4-county region. And you can zoom in and you can drop a point. And as you can see, some people have already dropped some. I can see here somebody loves the creek and the falls and the hike down to Rock Bridge over here. You can see that somebody really likes Natural Bridge. So we want to know, what are the places that people think are special, and where are they? And if it's a place that you think is so special that you don't think anybody should go there, that's okay. You don't have to put it on the map. We understand that that is something that's important to some people. Sorry. There we go. The next thing is the survey, and hopefully most of you have taken the survey. But the survey will be up for a few more weeks, but then we are going to be probably putting in a different survey once we get a little further along in the process, in the planning process. So if you come here, it's very easy to take the survey. You just click in buttons as they for each question. This one you reorder things depending on how you want to rank them. But it's a pretty simple survey, and we encourage all of you guys to start with that, and we will likely have more in the future. And then we have our idea wall, and the way this one works is we want people to just post things. What do you think about the Gorge? What do you value most? What's important to you? And then have a discussion around it. So as you can see with this one, people can you can like it, you can dislike it, you can comment on it. Anything that you want to say. Obviously, we want people to be respectful. But we really want to know, what are the things that are special about the Gorge area, and we want people to have a conversation back and forth because we think more good ideas will come out of that if we have a conversation. Okay, I'm going to go back to the presentation. All right. So if you don't mind, please spend some time visiting the website and share that with your friends. And I don't think I'm sharing the right one. Dave, can you see what I'm sharing?
We still have the Social Pinpoint page. Is it supposed to progress to another slide?
Okay. Are we on?
There we go.
Conditions? Yeah.
Yes, there we
go. So what you see there is a picture of the arrow darter, which is an endangered species, and that is one of a few that we are looking at in terms of where we could site a resort and where we can build and how we can build if we build a resort. So we're looking at several endangered species, critical habitat. We're looking at cliff lines. We're looking at caves. And when we get to a final site, we'll be inspecting those in detail. We'll have a team of environmental scientists that go and walk the site and look for things that we need to be aware of that would impact our ability to develop there. We're also looking at the geology. We're looking at the soils. We're looking at the rock underneath, things that would impact our ability to build roads, to build buildings. All that will be important. I mentioned we're looking at the transportation infrastructure, what projects might be needed to improve access not only to the site, but around the region as well, because with many more tourists coming in, you guys have probably, if you're over there, you've seen that the road network can get a bit crowded at times, especially at the Native Tunnel and places like that. So we'll be looking at projects like that to suggest go into the transportation plan and other things that can help improve transportation in the area. We also will be looking at the utilities, the wireless service, and broadband. As you well know, that you don't have consistent wireless service, and definitely don't have broadband in all areas, and so making recommendations for how that can not only impact the resort, but also other types of economic development in that four-county area are things that we're looking at, and we'll eventually make recommendations on. As we mentioned before, we are in the process of going through a site selection process to identify a site that we think would be a good candidate for a resort, that we haven't yet decided what that resort would exactly be, but we need to make sure that there is a place we could actually do that. So we had several criteria that we used to do our initial site selection preliminary screening. So we looked at all the parcels in the four counties that we're looking at. So those are Wolf, Menifee, Lee, and Powell. And so we did an analysis of the slopes. It's very difficult and not necessarily in our best interest to develop on areas with a slope greater than 25%. So we had to find parcels that had a certain number of acres of slopes less than 25%. We also needed to avoid floodplain. So we looked for parcels that did not have very much floodplain in them. We looked at the drive time to the Slade area amenities because we really felt like that the Slade is the center of the Red River Gorge universe in terms of activity related to the gorge and people who visit the area, that Slade's really that center. And we wanted to make sure that wherever we site the resort, that it's easy access to Slade and all those existing attractions and restaurants and other amenities. We looked at roadway access. What parcels have access on a arterial, on a local collector, or on a small county road. We looked at proximity to interchanges, and that's not just the Slade interchange, but we looked at the other interchanges at Stanton and Campton and Pine Ridge. We also looked at interchanges on I-75 and on I-64. Those ended up all being a bit further away than we were comfortable with, so we really focused on the ones on the Mountain Parkway. As I mentioned before, we looked at public drinking water access, public sewer access. We looked at ownership. Was it privately owned property, or was it owned either by the state or the federal government? Was there a conservation easement on it, or was it a wilderness area? Because if it was a wilderness area or an area with a conservation easement, that may have gone ahead and taken them off the table. And we also looked at alcoholic beverage availability. So what all that means is we were able to narrow it down to some sites for further inspection, and we still are in the process of trying to decide on a site that we think is the most ideal. But just because we make a recommendation for the one that we think is the most ideal, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where we will end up. A lot of things have to happen before we get that far. But choosing the ideal site is up next on our agenda for the next few weeks. Once we do that, we're going to be taking a very close look, as I mentioned before, at the actual view sheds and viewpoints on the site. How can we site things? Are the slopes really what we think they are? Can we really get access? Is there more than one way in and out? We're going to look at the cost to add the infrastructure. We'll look at additional environmental constraints and geological. And we'll try to identify what are the cool features on the site that might make a resort more interesting. We'll look at proximity to trails, land availability, and in terms of adjacent properties and broadband access. And so those are the kind of things that we're going to look at to try to choose that next that final group of sites, or a final site if we can get that far. All right. We also have been doing a bit of a market study and economic analysis. This has been done by our colleagues from MXD. And one of the first things they did was do some case studies of comparable resorts and looking at best practices. So you can see on the screen a list of the primary resorts they did case studies on that are included in our preliminary findings report. And these were ones that we all really felt like had some similarities to what we think is going to be possible in the Red River Gorge area, and offer some good examples for the types of amenities and program elements that a successful resort would have. So after those case studies, there was a set of possible activities and amenities that were analyzed and then ranked. And so the MXD team went through all of those, ranked them not only just for whether or not they would be a good idea in the actual resort, but would be a good idea in the 4-county study area that we're looking at, because some activities are already well represented in the area and don't necessarily need to be represented on a resort property. Some other activities may only be of interest to people staying at the resort, but it might not have wide appeal to other travelers to the Gorge area. So the rankings were based on all of those types of things, and came up with basically a ranking of the top amenities that should be considered when putting together a program for a resort. So as you can see, gathering and celebration became the first one, and that really is about having meeting spaces and places to do events like weddings and things like that, maybe corporate retreats. Obviously, food and drink is really important. Having a nice restaurant experience, multiple experiences, and would be ideal. Health and wellness always comes up, and that could come in the form of a spa, could come in the form of other activities. Outdoors, naturally, obviously fits in perfectly with why we're in the Red River Gorge looking at this in the first place. Education, we feel like there's an opportunity for some outdoor environmental education, some regional and cultural education that could come with this. They did look at golf. What's interesting is that it scored higher than probably expected. Maybe that's due to COVID. But what we're not looking at building a golf course. That has not been discussed. But maybe some golf-related activities in the resort, something like a Top Golf that's virtual for some of those resort guests. But we have not had a conversation about building a golf course. Outdoor adventure, and that really, it came in at number 7, but the reason it came in at number 7 is because it's so well represented already in the 4-county area that it didn't come up as something that needed to be a huge focus of a potential resort. And then, of course, family activities, kids camps, things to allow parents to do other things or kids to learn new skills. So, and then finally, I wanted to just give you an idea of what else we're working on and where we're going from here. So as I mentioned before, we have to get to the point where we can make a recommendation for a site that we think is a really good option for a resort, and so we're working on that. We will make some recommendations not only for the resort site itself, but also for the surrounding areas in terms of utility system upgrades and transportation system upgrades. We will be developing that vision for the resort and building on what we just talked about, developing a conceptual plan for how a resort might be laid out on the site that we choose and what all the activities might be. And then we're also working on a tourism marketing strategy for the 4-county area. That's what Creative Studio is working on with us. And we feel like that's really going to tie together a lot of things. It's going to have a large economic development piece, but it's also going to have a branding element. And will be something that, we offer a set of recommendations that hopefully folks will be interested in using, and hopefully we'll give them some materials that they find to be useful. But we feel like that's going to kind of tie in not only what's happening at the resort, but all those other great things that are happening in the Red River Gorge area, whether it be existing rock climbing activities and outfitters that are doing that, the folks that are doing canoe trips on the Red River, the restaurants that are there already, some that are world famous, and all those other things that are going on will be tied in together with that, so that it becomes more of a strategy to develop tourism and economic development than just a way to build a resort on a property in that area. So that's kind of where we are, and I'm sure you guys have lots of questions. So I am going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see me and that I can see the questions and answers. And let's see.
Hey, John, a couple of process questions. A couple of people have asked whether or not this town meeting would be available on the website later and/or the PowerPoint you just presented.
Yes, we can do that. I will. I'm recording this, and we'll see how easy it is to put it on the website for folks to view. All right, so
and we'll try to link it to our website too, the project website of Red River KY if we can.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. The top scoring question is from Jeremy. So is the goal to draw a massive amount of tourists? No, it's definitely not to draw a massive amount of tourists. You know, we're already seeing an increase in tourism in the Gorge area, and you know, we feel like that the type of resort that we will end up recommending will be different than anything that is there now, and so there will be additional visitors, but at massive amounts is not the word I would use to describe it. We will not be recommending something that is going to bring a number of people that would change the you know, the amount of parking spaces available at all the trailheads and things like that. So we're not talking about huge numbers of let's see.
And John, a lot of those activities, for example, would be contained on a resort site. For example, if you had a wedding attended by 200 people, 20 of them might stay over a day or two to hike or this or that, but most would be coming to the wedding and stay at the resort and activities, whether it's a spa or nature trails or whatever on that site.
And then the last part of that question, Jeremy, about the investments in maintenance and things like that, that will come later. There will definitely be an amount of money that is going to be necessary to do probably some remediation, some mitigation, and to do some maintenance. And those will be things that will have to go into the financial analysis. You know, what's the cost of operating a resort in terms of specifically the resort. We also, in our conversations with Forest Service and with others, are recognizing some other areas that that we can maybe provide some assistance and some ideas on how to address them. So we may be looking at how we can help them identify appropriate grant programs or other funding sources to help with some of the initiatives they already have going on. But a lot of that stuff will be outside the scope of this project, but we will cover what we can. So the next question, Paul Hammond had a question about the environmental ecological study. So I went through some of that, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is the cliff lines. We are using guidance from the Forest Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service as we move forward on cliff lines. And so anything that we do, we'll look at least a 200-foot buffer around the cliff lines. And we will do an investigation to see if there's other habitat for other threatened and endangered species on the property that we end up selecting, so that we have a plan to mitigate any impacts to those. So, this is an interesting question from Michelle. There was a proposal for a 10-mile zone to control businesses. That is news to me, and I don't know anything about that. The only 10-mile thing that we came up with was, we had one of our criteria that I went through earlier in terms of the proximity to Slade was a 10-minute drive as opposed to a 10-mile radius, but we gave points to properties based on being within a 10-minute, 20-minute, or 30-minute drive to Slade. But in terms of something to control businesses, that's outside of our scope and not something that we're looking at.
Hey, John, I think where she saw that was in our original concept paper, where we presented obviously a bunch of ideas about growth in the gorge and how a resort would fit in, and posed the question, should there be controls? There is no planning and zoning in the 4-county area, and somebody could come in and create let's say a brew pub and invest a lot of money, and something next to it could be just the opposite of something that wouldn't fit in. But right now the study is focused, and I think didn't you say you have your team has a conference call with the Forest Service next week to understand the restrictions on the geological area, the Forest Service owned lands, the Forest Service controlled lands, and then any other restrictions in the area. So that would tell us a lot about development of a resort and what else might be in the vicinity. The resort itself would probably be on a large enough piece of land where there'd be a fair amount of isolation offered just by the topography of the property.
Yeah, the sites need to be of a certain size. We really weren't looking at anything less than 200 acres. So there would definitely be some isolation there. So I see Zena has a question about, or a comment about small business. We're definitely in tune with that. We have several small business owners on our local advisory board. And so our recommendations will be very careful about how we talk about and things that we recommend that have to do and might impact local business. And the conversations we've had so far have really centered around whatever this resort ends up being. It's going to be very important that the people who come and stay in that resort also go and visit the local businesses and attractions that are already in existence and the new ones that will hopefully come about because of additional visitors. So that's definitely something that we're sensitive to. There's only so much we can do in terms of making recommendations, but that's definitely something that will be in our final report.
And John, why don't you mention in answer to Zena's question about that you all are doing some preliminary analysis of the economic impact and the amount of dollars that would come into the region because of this?
Yeah, that's part of the analysis. We'll have, once we have an idea of the size and scale of the resort, we have some preliminary numbers based on what might be possible, but we have to ground truth that with an actual site and what it can support, and then what the financial analysis says is actually feasible. But once we get to that and we know where the resort could be located, and we know the size of it, how many people it will require to operate it, how many employees, and how many anticipated visitors there are, then we can produce numbers that really start to show not only the number of jobs in the actual resort, but then the jobs that are created because of that resort. And some of those will be because there's supplies that have to come in and that can be supplied. Some of those will be supplied locally, some will not be, but there will be jobs created that way. There will be jobs created, hopefully, because there are new tourism opportunities for entrepreneurs to support additional guests. So we'll have some better estimates on those numbers once we reach the point where we have an idea of what size resort we would like to recommend. We're just not quite that far yet. So let's see. We have not done a erosion and flooding study. What we will do is, when we get to the point that we have a site and we start working at design, we will be looking at stormwater retention, stormwater runoff, and that will be included in the preliminary concept plan and will have to be included in a final design if that ever happens. So that will be something that is more important later on than it is obviously right now. Traffic congestion and trails, that's definitely something that we're looking at, and we'll hopefully make some recommendations. That'll be some of our conversation with the Forest Service about, are there some other things that we could help you with that might help with the parking congestion at trailheads, and are there some other trails that could be opened if you had a way to access them that might take some pressure off of the existing trail network. So we will be looking at those. They're a little bit beyond our scope in some ways, but we want to make sure that we do address those, because it could be that we identify some new opportunities or some new partners for the Forest Service to address them. All right. Let's see. We've got I'm reading Laura's question. So a final report. So when we get that far, which will be sometime probably in September, we will have our recommendations for a tourism and marketing strategy for the 4-county area, focused really on Red River Gorge related activities for the most part, but some of the other things that are there and are complementary will be included in that as well. We will have some recommendations for transportation and transportation and infrastructure upgrades. We will have a concept for a resort that will have some drawings of what it might look like and how it might be laid out, and a list of things that will need to be considered when final design comes. And those will be things like the sensitive habitats, the cliff lines, and other things environmentally that will be constraints on a site. That will go in there as well. We'll go ahead and identify those, even though that we won't be doing the actual final design, and what ends up happening may look very different than what we draw in our report. And the master plan, once it's finalized, that will really be, Dave, you can probably answer that question better than I can. How will you guys use the master plan once we're finished?
Well, I think the short answer is that we will take it to market. In other words, we will use the data and the recommendations to go and try to stir interest. There is no developer standing behind the curtain waiting to be introduced and develop this plan. We would have to go find that. The business people who are involved in this project are interested in Eastern Kentucky. They are from there. They're loyal to the region. They would like to see something happen, but no one has said, all right, here's my investment, or here's the developer that'll make this happen. So we'll go out and we'll beat the bushes to try to find an appropriate party that would come in and help us make something a reality, if indeed the study shows that it's feasible. I don't doubt that something like this is feasible in the area. I mean, already the cabin market is just really blossoming there. I think, John, haven't you all identified maybe 350 cabins in the Gorge area and maybe up to 500 in the 4-county region?
I think the number goes up every time we talk about it.
Well, there are people building cabins even in this economic slowdown. There are things that are going on right now. They're just amazing. So there is a market for tourism. The area is growing, but not to belabor the point, but we'll have to go out there and see if we can stir some interest, both on the investor side and on the developer side. It would not be a problem to find somebody to build it, like a contractor. That's not the issue. The issue is who would put up money, who would come up with the development plan and take on the risk of doing a major development.